You don't belong here. This is a place for real executives, not people like you." The words sliced through the marble-clad executive lounge of Manhattan's most prestigious financial tower, like a blade through silk. Victoria Sterling's voice carried the kind of authority that came from 12 years of clawing her way up the corporate ladder. Each rung climbed over the backs of people she deemed beneath her notice. The 52nd floor of Apex Holdings commanded a view of Central Park that cost more per square foot than most people's annual salaries. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across Italian leather furniture, where Wall Street's elite gathered for the most important merger announcement in financial history. The air itself seemed expensive, perfumed with success and old money. Marcus Thompson looked up from his modest black leather portfolio, his dark eyes meeting Victoria's ice blue stare without flinching. He sat perfectly still in one of the coveted window seats. His off-the-rack navy suit, a stark contrast to the sea of designer threads surrounding him. His Toyota Camry keys rested on the mahogany side table next to a simple black coffee, while Victoria's Hermes bag swung from her shoulder like a weapon of class warfare. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the measured calm of someone who had learned to choose his words carefully. "I believe there might be some confusion." Victoria's blonde hair caught the morning light as she positioned herself between Marcus and the gathering crowd of executives. Her $8,000 Armani suit seemed to armor her against any possibility that she might be wrong about the situation unfolding before her. The only confusion, she replied, her manicured finger pointing like an accusation, is how building security allowed you to access this executive event. This morning's announcement affects billions in assets. We can't have random people wandering into sensitive corporate meetings. Around them, smartphones emerged from expensive pockets. The gathered executives began to sense that something more than a simple security misunderstanding was developing. A young associate from Goldman Sachs quietly activated her Instagram live stream, not knowing she was about to broadcast the moment that would forever change how corporate America thought about power privilege and the price of assumptions. But what Victoria Sterling didn't know would destroy her career in exactly 47 minutes. 4 hours earlier, Marcus Thompson had begun his day the same way he had every morning for the past 15 years. In his modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn Heights, he sat in quiet meditation, watching the sun rise over the Manhattan skyline he had conquered, not through birthright or connections, but through sheer determination and intelligence that refused to be overlooked. His Toyota Camry, a 2018 model, with 89,000 miles, sat in the building's underground garage next to Teslas and BMWs belonging to other residents. Marcus could afford any car he wanted, could afford 10 of any car he wanted. But the Camry reminded him of where he came from and why every day mattered. The drive into Manhattan took him through neighborhoods that told the story of his life in reverse. From the gentrified brownstones of Brooklyn Heights, past the housing projects where his mother had raised him alone, through the financial district, where he now commanded more respect than most people dreamed of. Each mile was a chapter in a book that very few people had ever bothered to read. Meanwhile, in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Victoria Sterling's morning routine unfolded with the precision of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. Her personal driver waited outside while she selected from a closet that cost more than most people's cars. Born to a family of lawyers and judges, she had attended elite private schools where exclusion was taught as naturally as arithmetic. Victoria's path to power had been paved with advantages she had never acknowledged. Summer internships arranged through family connections, law school admission that her LSAT scores alone couldn't have secured, and a starting position at Sterling & Associates, the firm founded by her grandfather in 1952, back when women like her were rarities in law, and people like Marcus were invisible entirely. The merger meeting, scheduled for 10 a.m., represented the culmination of 18 months of negotiations. Apex Holdings, the financial giant that occupied floors 45 through 55 of the tower, was being acquired in a deal that would reshape the industry. The announcement would affect pension funds, retirement accounts, and investment portfolios across the globe. Victoria's firm, Sterling and Associates, handled legal affairs for most of the major players in Manhattan's financial district. Her partnership with the firm wasn't just professional success. It was family legacy, personal identity, and social status, all wrapped into one carefully crafted persona. She had spent the previous evening at an exclusive charity gala networking with the same circle of wealthy white professionals who had dominated Wall Street for generations. The conversations had flowed as smoothly as the $1,000 bottles of wine, everyone secure in their shared understanding of who belonged and who didn't. Marcus had spent his evening differently. In a community center in East New York, he had spoken to a group of high school students about financial literacy and entrepreneurship. No cameras, no publicity, no tax write-offs. Just a man who remembered being 17 and believing that success was something that happened to other people. The students had asked him how he made it, how someone from their neighborhood could break into a world that seemed designed to keep them out. Marcus had told them the truth, that it required being twice as good to get half as far, that every day would be a battle to prove their worth, and that the system would never be fair, but could be changed from within. What he hadn't told them was that after 15 years of breaking barriers and building an empire, he still faced moments like the one waiting for him in 43 minutes, when all his success would be invisible to someone who saw only the color of his skin. The irony wasn't lost on him that today's merger announcement would make him one of the most powerful men on Wall Street, controlling assets that would dwarf the portfolios of most of the executives gathering in that 52nd floor lounge. But Victoria Sterling would see only what she expected to see, a black man in a space where she believed black men didn't belong. As Marcus parked his Camry in the underground garage and took the elevator to the executive floor, he carried with him not just the merger documents that would change everything, but the weight of every assumption, every microaggression, and every moment of doubt that had shaped his journey to this moment. The financial district was waking up around him, but Marcus Thompson was about to shake it from its deepest sleep. The executive lounge buzzed with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to moving billions of dollars with their signatures. Marcus had entered through the main elevators, his guest credentials clearly visible on the lanyard around his neck. But Victoria Sterling's gaze had locked onto him the moment he'd stepped into her carefully curated world. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice cutting through conversations about quarterly reports and acquisition strategies. She approached Marcus with the purposeful stride of someone used to being obeyed. "I think you might be lost. The service elevators are down the hall, and the custodial staff meeting isn't until this afternoon." The assumption hit the room like a dropped crystal glass. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Someone's coffee cup clinked against a saucer with unnecessary loudness. Marcus looked up from his tablet, where he had been reviewing the final merger documents. His expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, but a weary recognition of a script he had hoped he might never have to perform again. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Marcus replied calmly, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had learned that any show of emotion would be weaponized against him. "I'm here for the 10 o'clock announcement." Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. "The 10 o'clock announcement is for senior executives and board members only. This is a $5,000 per person event." She gestured around the room with a sweep that encompassed the crystal, the marble, the panoramic view of Manhattan. "Perhaps you're thinking of the community investment meeting that's held in the conference room on the 32nd floor." The racial coding in her words was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but clear enough that everyone in the room understood exactly what she meant. Marcus belonged in community investment, a euphemism for programs designed to help those people. He couldn't possibly belong among the real decision-makers. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a portfolio manager from BlackRock, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had worked with Marcus Thompson before, had seen his name on documents that moved markets. But something about Victoria's confidence made her doubt her own recognition. In corporate America, white confidence often outweighed black competence, even when the competence was legendary. "Ma'am," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Perhaps if I showed you my—" "Don't." Victoria's voice sharpened to a blade. "I've been practicing corporate law in this building for 12 years. I know everyone who belongs at this level." She stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell her perfume. Something French and aggressively expensive. "And I know when someone is trying to gain unauthorized access to confidential corporate proceedings." Around them, phones were emerging from pockets. Sarah Kim, a junior analyst from JP Morgan, quietly opened her TikTok app and began recording. She had 3,000 followers who were about to witness something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about corporate America. Marcus maintained his calm, but his hand tightened slightly on his tablet. Inside that device were documents that would reshape the financial industry contracts with his signature, alongside those of the most powerful people in American business. But Victoria Sterling saw only what she expected to see: a threat to be neutralized, an outsider to be expelled. "I understand your concern," Marcus said, his voice carrying a patience that had been earned through decades of similar encounters. "But I assure you, I have every right to be here." Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. "We'll see about that." She pulled out her iPhone 15 Pro Max with the decisive motion of someone about to end a problem permanently. Victoria's manicured fingers flew across her phone screen with the precision of someone accustomed to solving problems through authority and intimidation. The executive lounge fell silent, except for the soft classical music that had been designed to soothe wealthy nerves during high-stakes negotiations. James Victoria's voice carried across the marble floor as she connected with building security. "This is Victoria Sterling from Sterling & Associates. We have a situation in the executive lounge that requires immediate attention. Someone has gained unauthorized access to this morning's merger announcement." Marcus continued reading his tablet, but every person in the room could feel the tension building like static electricity before a storm. The other executives, portfolio managers, investment directors, senior partners, found themselves caught between curiosity and discomfort. This was the kind of scene that created viral moments and destroyed careers, but no one seemed quite sure whose career was in jeopardy. Within 3 minutes, the elevator chimed with the soft tone reserved for executive floors. James Rodriguez, the building's chief of security, emerged flanked by 2 uniformed guards. Rodriguez was a former NYPD detective who had built his reputation on discretion and efficiency. He surveyed the scene with professional eyes that had seen everything from corporate espionage to executive breakdowns. Ms. Sterling Rodriguez nodded respectfully. Victoria's law firm occupied 3 floors of the building and represented several major tenants. Her word carried weight in situations like this. What seems to be the problem? Victoria positioned herself like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "This gentleman has somehow accessed our executive lounge without proper authorization. Today's merger announcement involves classified financial information. We cannot have unauthorized personnel in the room." Rodriguez turned his attention to Marcus, who looked up from his tablet with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the confrontation. There was something about Marcus's bearing that gave Rodriguez pause, a quiet confidence that didn't match the profile of someone who had sneaked into a corporate event. Sir Rodriguez said politely, "I'm going to need to see some identification and verification of your authorization to be in this area." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and unhurried. But before he could withdraw his credentials, Victoria stepped forward with the aggressive posture of someone who sensed victory within reach. "Let me save everyone some time," Victoria announced to the growing audience. "I've been practicing law in this building for 12 years. I know every senior executive, every board member, every person who has legitimate business at this level." She gestured toward Marcus with barely concealed disdain. "This is obviously someone who either forged credentials or is using outdated information to gain access." The room held its breath. Sarah Kim's TikTok live stream had grown to 15,000 viewers, with comments flooding in faster than anyone could read them. The hashtag Apex Meeting was beginning to trend regionally, though no one in the room yet understood the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Marcus withdrew a leather credential holder from his jacket, not the expensive kind favored by Wall Street executives, but a simple black folder that had seen years of use. He handed it to Rodriguez without comment, his dark eyes never leaving Victoria's face. Rodriguez opened the credentials, and his expression changed immediately. His eyebrows rose slightly. Then he looked at Marcus with new recognition. He glanced back at the credentials, then at Marcus again, as if confirming what he was seeing. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said to Victoria, his tone shifting to something more careful, "I think there might be some confusion here." But Victoria was already shaking her head before Rodriguez could continue. "James, I appreciate your thoroughness, but fake IDs are increasingly sophisticated these days. Anyone can have impressive-looking credentials printed." She reached for the credential holder. "Let me verify whether this documentation is legitimate. I have contacts throughout the financial district who can confirm." "Please don't touch my personal property," Marcus said quietly. But his words carried an authority that made Victoria's hand freeze mid-reach. The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time since the confrontation began, Victoria looked uncertain. Rodriguez was studying the credentials more carefully now, his security training evident in how thoroughly he examined every detail. When he looked up again, his expression was unreadable, but respectful. "Sir," he said to Marcus, "everything appears to be in order." Victoria's face flushed with frustration. "That's impossible." Marcus's phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout the confrontation, but now it began ringing with the insistence of something urgent. The caller ID displayed "Board Emergency Line," but the screen was angled away from Victoria's view. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely, declining the call. "I'll handle this after our situation is resolved." But the phone immediately rang again. This time the display showed Sarah Chen, CFO. Marcus declined this call as well, but not before Dr. Jennifer Walsh caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. Her eyebrows furrowed with recognition. Victoria, however, interpreted the calls differently. "You see," she said to Rodriguez and the gathered crowd, "he's probably coordinating with accomplices." Corporate espionage is more sophisticated than ever. They use legitimate-looking credentials and coordinated communication to... Marcus's phone rang a third time. Michael Torres, General Counsel, appeared on the screen. This time, Dr. Walsh's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Victoria," Dr. Walsh said carefully, "I think we should... Jennifer, please." Victoria cut her off with the dismissive wave of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "I know you want to be helpful, but this is exactly how these situations escalate. Trust and verify, but don't be naive." Marcus reached into his briefcase and withdrew a business card holder. Not the platinum cases favored by Wall Street elites, but a worn leather folder that suggested years of use. He extracted a single card and offered it to Rodriguez. Victoria stepped between them and plucked the card from Marcus's fingers before the security chief could take it. She examined it with the scrutiny of a forensic expert, holding it up to the light, checking the paper quality, running her thumb across the raised lettering. "Very impressive," she announced to the room. high-quality cardstock professional printing, even holographic security features. She turned the card toward the audience like evidence in a trial. But I know every legitimate executive in this building. This is obviously... She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes had focused on the text, and for the first time since the confrontation began, uncertainty flickered across her features. This says... Victoria's voice trailed off as she read the card more carefully. Her face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. The business card was simple but elegant. Marcus Thompson, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Thompson Financial Group. Below that, in smaller text, specializing in mergers and acquisitions. Dr. Walsh had moved closer, craning her neck to see the card. When she read it, her expression shifted from curiosity to alarm. Victoria, Dr. Walsh whispered urgently. Thompson Financial Group is... But Victoria was already tearing the business card in half, her movements sharp and desperate. Obviously forged, she declared, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Anyone can have business cards printed. The question is, why someone would go to such elaborate lengths to impersonate a... Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the lounge. It wasn't a happy smile. A what Ms. Sterling Sarah Kim's TikTok live stream had exploded beyond anything she had ever experienced. The viewer count had climbed past 50,000 and was accelerating exponentially. Comments flooded the screen in multiple languages: English, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, as the story transcended cultural and geographical boundaries. Apex meeting was trending #1 nationally on Twitter, ahead of political scandals and celebrity gossip. Screenshots of Victoria's confrontation with Marcus were being shared across every social media platform, with lawyers, business analysts, and social justice advocates providing real-time commentary. Victoria, unaware of her viral fame, continued her performance for what she assumed was a small audience of fellow executives. She had positioned herself at the center of the lounge, using the space like a courtroom, where she was both judge and prosecutor. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been wrong in public. What we're witnessing is a sophisticated attempt to infiltrate one of the most important corporate announcements of the year. She gestured toward Marcus, who remained seated with his torn business card scattered on the marble floor beside him. Notice how he maintains his composure. This isn't amateur hour. Professional corporate espionage requires exactly this kind of psychological training. CNN's financial desk had picked up the live stream and was showing clips during their morning broadcast. Bloomberg Television was preparing a segment. The Wall Street Journal's Twitter account was sharing updates in real time. What had started as a private corporate gathering was becoming a global case study in bias power and the assumptions that shaped American business culture. Marcus's phone continued buzzing with increasing urgency. Board members, legal counsel, and senior executives from across the financial industry were trying to reach him. But each declined call only reinforced Victoria's narrative about coordination with outside accomplices. You see how he's ignoring those calls, Victoria pointed out to her audience. Classic corporate espionage protocol. Never answer unknown numbers during an operation. Those are probably his handlers coordinating the next phase of whatever they're planning. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was typing frantically on her phone, trying to verify what her memory was telling her about Thompson Financial Group. Other executives were doing the same, but Victoria's commanding presence and absolute certainty made them doubt their own research. Rodriguez had been watching the interaction with growing unease. His security background had taught him to trust documentation over assumptions, but Victoria's legal credentials and her firm's relationship with the building complicated his professional judgment. Meanwhile, on social media, the story was developing its own momentum. Justice. For Marcus was trending alongside Apex meeting. Employment lawyers were analyzing Victoria's statements for potential discrimination claims. Diversity and inclusion consultants were using the footage as examples of unconscious bias in action. Prominent black executives were sharing their own stories of similar confrontations. A Harvard Business School professor was preparing an emergency lecture about the video. The NAACP's Corporate Diversity Division was drafting a statement, but inside the executive lounge, the bubble of privilege remained intact. Victoria's confidence was infectious among people who had spent their careers in environments where confidence often mattered more than competence. "I'm calling the police," Victoria announced, pulling out her phone with theatrical precision. "This has gone beyond a simple security matter. We're dealing with potential corporate espionage, possible securities fraud, and definitely trespassing." She began dialing 911, her manicured fingers moving across the screen while maintaining eye contact with Marcus. "Yes, I need officers at Apex Holdings Manhattan Financial District. We have an individual who has gained unauthorized access to confidential corporate proceedings and is refusing to leave the premises." Marcus continued to smile that quiet, knowing smile. The avalanche was about to begin. The executive elevator chimed with its distinctive tone, a sound that cost more than most people's monthly salaries to engineer. The polished steel doors opened with whisper-quiet precision, revealing a woman whose presence immediately shifted the energy in the room like the arrival of a storm front. Sarah Chen stepped into the lounge wearing a charcoal gray suit that spoke of serious money, seriously spent. As Chief Financial Officer of Thompson Financial Group, she commanded respect in boardrooms from Manhattan to Hong Kong. Her expression was unreadable, but her dark eyes swept the scene with the analytical precision that had made her one of the most feared negotiators on Wall Street. Victoria Sterling's face lit up with relief. She recognized Sarah from various corporate events and industry conferences. Another powerful woman navigating the male-dominated world of high finance. Surely Sarah would understand the security concerns and support Victoria's position. "Sarah," Victoria called out, her voice carrying across the marble floor with desperate enthusiasm. "Thank God you're here. We have a serious situation that requires immediate resolution." Sarah's gaze moved methodically around the room, taking in the scattered pieces of Marcus's torn business card, the security guards standing at attention, the phones recording everything, and finally settling on Marcus himself. Something passed between them. A look of recognition and shared understanding that lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but communicated volumes. Victoria Sarah said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to managing billion-dollar crises. "What exactly is happening here?" Victoria stepped forward, eagerly, sensing an ally in her moment of professional triumph. "I've identified a significant security breach. This individual has somehow gained unauthorized access to today's merger announcement." She gestured toward Marcus with the confidence of someone presenting evidence to a sympathetic jury. "I've been trying to resolve this diplomatically, but he's refusing to cooperate with building security." Sarah's expression remained neutral as she listened, but her fingers were moving across her phone screen with subtle urgency. She was sending messages to someone, though. Victoria was too focused on her explanation to notice. He had forged business cards claiming to be some kind of CEO. Victoria continued warming to her theme. "The quality was impressive. I'll give him credit for that. But I know every legitimate executive in this building, and this is obviously an elaborate deception." The live stream audience had grown to 75,000 viewers. Comments were flooding in so fast they were unreadable, but the tone was clear. People around the world were watching Victoria Sterling destroy her career in real time without realizing it. Sarah finished her texting and looked directly at Victoria with an expression that made the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. "Victoria," Sarah said slowly, each word carefully enunciated. "Do you know who you're talking to?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Victoria's confident smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. Of course, I know who I'm talking to, Victoria replied with a laugh that sounded increasingly hollow. You're Sarah Chen, CFO of Thompson Financial Group. That's exactly why I need your help with this security situation. Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. No, Victoria. Do you know who he is? She gestured toward Marcus, who had remained perfectly still throughout the exchange, watching the drama unfold with the patience of someone who had seen this script played out too many times before. Victoria's confidence began showing hairline cracks. He's someone who has illegally accessed our corporate event using forged credentials. I've already called the police, and they should be here shortly to resolve this matter. Sarah walked across the room with measured steps, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of a countdown. She stopped directly in front of Marcus and extended her hand in a gesture of profound respect. Mr. Thompson, Sarah said formally, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. I apologize for this delay. The board is waiting for you upstairs. The words detonated like a bomb in the confined space. Victoria's mouth opened and closed without sound. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's coffee cup slipped from her nerveless fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The security guards exchanged glances of dawning comprehension. Bored, Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible above the suddenly silent room. The emergency board meeting. Sarah continued, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face, that was called for 10 o'clock to discuss this morning's acquisition announcement. Rodriguez, the security chief, was re-examining Marcus's credentials with new understanding. His face had gone pale as the implications began to sink in. Victoria's legs seemed to wobble. She reached for the back of a nearby chair for support, her manicured nails scraping against the Italian leather. That's impossible, she whispered. Sarah's smile was now radioactive with satisfaction. Is it, Victoria? In your 12 years of practicing law in this building, have you ever actually researched who owns Thompson Financial Group? Marcus Thompson stood up for the first time since the confrontation began. The simple act of rising from his chair seemed to fill the room with a presence that made everyone suddenly aware of how small their assumptions had been. He was taller than Victoria had realized, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to commanding attention without raising his voice. Rodriguez had reassembled the pieces of Marcus's torn business card with the care of a forensic investigator. The text was now clear for everyone to see: Marcus Thompson, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Thompson Financial Group. The holographic security features that Victoria had dismissed as forgeries caught the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Chen announced to the stunned audience, allow me to properly introduce Marcus Thompson. Her voice carried the formal tone of someone making an introduction at a state dinner. Mr. Thompson founded Thompson Financial Group 14 years ago with a $50,000 loan from a community development bank in Detroit. Victoria's face had gone completely white beneath her carefully applied makeup. She was gripping the chair back so tightly that her knuckles showed through her skin. Sarah continued with the relentless precision of someone delivering a diagnosis. Thompson Financial Group currently manages $6.2 billion in assets across 37 countries. The company employs over 18,000 people globally and has been recognized by Forbes as one of the fastest-growing financial institutions in North America. Each fact landed like a physical blow on Victoria's crumbling composure. The woman she had just spent 20 minutes publicly humiliating, threatening with arrest, and attempting to remove from the premises wasn't just an executive. He was the executive whose signature moved markets and whose decisions affected retirement funds from New York to Tokyo. Dr. Jennifer Walsh found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Marcus, Mr. Thompson, I am so profoundly sorry. I should have recognized. I should have intervened earlier. Marcus's expression remained gentle but firm. Dr. Walsh, You tried to caution Ms. Sterling multiple times. She chose not to listen. His eyes moved to Victoria, who was now clutching the chair like a lifeline in a storm. Isn't that right, Ms. Sterling? Victoria's mouth moved soundlessly. Around her, the gathered executives were having their own moments of horrified realization. If Marcus Thompson owned Thompson Financial Group, and if today's announcement involved a major acquisition, then the implications were staggering. Sarah Chen pulled out her tablet and tapped the screen with surgical precision. "Which brings us to this morning's announcement," she said, projecting her voice to fill the suddenly silent room. As of 12:01 a.m. this morning, Thompson Financial Group completed its acquisition of Apex Holdings for $4.8 billion. The second earthquake hit the room. Several executives actually stepped backward. The mathematical implications began cascading through their minds like dominoes falling in sequence. "That means," Dr. Walsh said slowly, as if testing each word for stability, "that Thompson Financial Group now owns this building." "Correct," Sarah confirmed, "along with all subsidiaries, partnerships, and tenant relationships." Victoria's legs finally gave out. Only Dr. Walsh's quick reflexes kept her from collapsing completely onto the marble floor. The woman who had been commanding the room with absolute authority just minutes earlier was now a broken figure clinging to a stranger for support. But Sarah wasn't finished. She tapped her tablet again, and a familiar logo appeared on the screen: Sterling and Associates. Sterling and Associates has been a subsidiary of Apex Holdings since 2019. Sarah continued with the methodical precision of someone performing surgery. As of 12:01 a.m. this morning, every employee of Sterling and Associates became subject to Thompson Financial Group's employment policies and corporate culture standards. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Victoria wasn't just confronting her future boss. She was violating the employment policies of her current boss, policies she had never bothered to read because she had never imagined they would apply to someone like her. Marcus reached into his briefcase and withdrew a tablet. With a few swift taps, he projected Thompson Financial Group's employee handbook onto the room's emergency display system, a feature designed for building evacuations that was now being used for a very different kind of emergency. Page 47 filled the screen. Zero tolerance policy for discriminatory conduct. Article 12. 3. Marcus read aloud, his voice carrying easily across the silent room, states that any employee who engages in discriminatory behavior based on race, gender, religion, or any other protected characteristic faces immediate termination with cause. No warnings, no progressive discipline, no second chances. Victoria's breathing had become audible. Quick, shallow gasps, like someone drowning in plain sight. As of 12:01 a.m. this morning, Marcus continued, Ms. Sterling became subject to these policies. The video evidence we have from multiple angles documents clear violations of our anti-discrimination standards. Rodriguez was staring at the broken pieces of the business card in his hands, with the expression of someone who had just realized he was holding evidence of his own professional failure. Sir Rodriguez said quietly, "I owe you a profound apology. I should have—" Marcus raised a hand to stop him. "You were doing your job, Mr. Rodriguez. You examined my credentials and found them legitimate." Ms. Sterling chose to reject that verification. All eyes turned to Victoria, waiting for her response to the nuclear revelation that had just destroyed everything she thought she knew about power privilege and her place in the world. The silence in the executive lounge stretched like a piano wire, under tension, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. Victoria Sterling's world had collapsed so completely that she seemed unable to process the magnitude of her situation. But Marcus Thompson wasn't finished. He had learned that half measures in confronting systemic discrimination only allowed the problem to metastasize. Sarah Chen approached the tablet displaying Thompson Financial Group's employment policies. Her fingers moved across the screen with the confidence of someone who had helped draft the documents she was now accessing. The acquisition of Apex Holdings wasn't just a business decision Sarah announced to the room. It was part of Thompson Financial Group's systematic approach to transforming corporate culture throughout the financial industry. She tapped the screen, revealing a comprehensive presentation that had clearly been prepared well in advance. The first slide showed staggering statistics: workplace discrimination, the hidden cost of American business. Discrimination costs American businesses $64 billion annually. Sarah read, her voice carrying to every corner of the marble-clad room. Lost productivity, legal settlements, employee turnover, and damaged reputations create a cascade of financial devastation that affects shareholders, employees, and entire communities. Victoria managed to look up from her position slumped against the chair. Her face showed the dawning horror of someone beginning to understand that this moment wasn't random. It was orchestrated. Marcus stepped forward, his presence now commanding the room with quiet authority. "Sterling and Associates has been under observation for 18 months, he said, his voice conversational, despite the bombshell he was dropping. "We identified patterns of discriminatory behavior that created legal liability for every company in your professional network." The tablet screen filled with a complex diagram showing interconnected relationships. Sterling and Associates sat at the center like a spider in a web, with lines extending to clients, partners, and affiliated firms throughout Manhattan's financial district. 17 companies represented in this room use Sterling and Associates for legal services. Sarah continued. 29 have ongoing contracts or partnerships that flow through their network. When discrimination happens at Sterling and Associates, it creates ripple effects throughout the entire business ecosystem. The executives in the room began pulling out their phones, frantically texting their boards, their CFOs, their crisis management teams. The implications were staggering. Their companies weren't just witnesses to Victoria's discrimination. They were potentially complicit through their business relationships. Marcus clicked to the next slide, revealing financial data that made the room go completely silent. In the past 5 years, companies in this network have paid out $127 million in discrimination settlements. Legal fees added another $43 million. Lost contracts and damaged relationships cost an estimated $200 million in unrealized revenue. That's $370 million in preventable losses. Sarah added, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a scalpel. Money that could have been invested in growth, innovation, employee development, or shareholder returns. Instead, it went to lawyers and settlements and public relations cleanup. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was staring at the numbers with the expression of someone watching a natural disaster unfold in real time. As a portfolio manager, she understood exactly what those figures meant for the companies she represented. But here's what makes this morning's incident particularly significant. Marcus continued, advancing to the next slide. The screen now showed a timestamp, 12:01 a.m. Acquisition completed. Below that, another timestamp, 6:47 a.m. Discriminatory incident recorded. Ms. Sterling violated Thompson Financial Group's employment policies 6 hours and 46 minutes after becoming subject to those policies, Marcus explained. This represents the fastest documented case of policy violation in corporate history. Victoria's face had progressed beyond pale to a grayish color that suggested shock approaching medical emergency levels. The mathematical precision of her downfall was almost artistic in its completeness. Sarah pulled up another document on the screen, the Sterling and Associates restructuring plan. The presentation had clearly been prepared months in advance, waiting for exactly this moment. Effective immediately, Sarah announced, Sterling and Associates will be restructured under new management. All current partnerships and client relationships will be reviewed for compliance with Thompson Financial Group's diversity and inclusion standards. The implications hit the room like a financial tsunami. Several executives began calculating their own exposure, their own potential losses if their contracts were terminated. Companies that wish to maintain relationships with the new Sterling and Associates will need to demonstrate commitment to inclusive practices. Marcus continued. This isn't a suggestion or a recommendation. It's a requirement, backed by $6.2 billion in assets and the largest professional network in the financial industry. Dr. Marcus Chen, CEO of a mid-sized investment firm, finally found his voice. Mr. Thompson, what exactly are you proposing? Marcus's smile was sharp, but not unkind. I'm proposing that we fix this systematically, permanently, and profitably. The screen filled with details of the Thompson Equity Protocol, a comprehensive program that made Victoria's personal crisis look like a small part of a much larger transformation. Starting Monday, Marcus explained every company in our professional network will implement standardized anti-discrimination policies with independent oversight, not internal HR departments that report to executives who might have conflicts of interest, but external auditing firms with no stake in covering up problems. The scope was breathtaking. Real-time monitoring systems that tracked hiring patterns, promotion rates, and workplace culture metrics. AI-powered analysis that identified potential discrimination before it became litigation. Mandatory bias training for all leadership positions with annual certification requirements. The legal framework is already in place, Sarah added. Every contract renewal, every partnership agreement, every service relationship will include compliance with these protocols. Companies that don't participate simply won't be part of the network. Victoria finally managed to speak, her voice barely audible above the room's ambient noise. You planned this. All of it. You've been planning this for months. Marcus looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. 2 years, actually. Ever since we lost 3 of our most brilliant attorneys, all women of color, who left the profession because they couldn't deal with the discrimination they faced from firms exactly like yours. The personal motivation behind the systematic approach hit the room like a final revelation. This wasn't just about business efficiency or legal compliance. This was about human cost, talent wasted, and potential destroyed by exactly the kind of thinking Victoria had displayed. So yes, Ms. Sterling, Marcus continued. We planned this very carefully, and you just gave us the perfect case study. The 48th floor boardroom of Apex Holdings had been designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan that stretched from the Hudson River to the East River, while the mahogany conference table could seat 40 people beneath lighting that cost more per fixture than most annual salaries. But this morning, only 23 people occupied the leather chairs around that table, and none of them were admiring the view. Victoria Sterling sat at the far end like a defendant, awaiting sentencing, the manila envelope containing her fate unopened before her. Her earlier confidence had evaporated completely, leaving behind a hollow-eyed woman confronting the wreckage of everything she had built over 12 years. Marcus Thompson stood at the head of the table where he belonged, not as an intruder, but as the chairman and CEO of the company that now owned everything in sight. His laptop was open before him, and the wall-mounted display showed the Thompson Financial Group logo, with its elegant, understated design that commanded more respect than any flashy corporate emblem ever could. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice filling the acoustically perfect room. Thank you for attending this emergency session. I know this morning has been educational for everyone involved. Nervous laughter rippled around the table. Dr. Jennifer Walsh sat closest to Marcus, having clearly chosen her allegiance during the lounge confrontation. Sarah Chen occupied her usual seat at Marcus's right hand, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes sharp with satisfaction. 3 lawyers from Sterling and Associates huddled together near the windows, their faces reflecting the ashen color of people who had just watched their careers incinerate in real time. They had supported Victoria's behavior, encouraged it even, and now faced the consequences of that choice. Before we discuss the acquisition details, Marcus continued clicking to advance his presentation. I want to address what happened downstairs. Not the incident itself, but what it reveals about systemic issues that cost our industry billions annually. The screen filled with data that made several executives shift uncomfortably in their $3,000 leather chairs. Charts, graphs, and statistics that painted a picture of an industry hemorrhaging money through discrimination bias and exclusionary practices. Companies with diverse leadership teams show 35% higher profitability and 70% better innovation metrics. Marcus read from the display. Yet only 3% of Fortune 500 companies have ever had a black CEO. Only 12% have ever had a woman of color in senior leadership. Victoria's head remained bowed, but Marcus noticed she was listening intently to every word. Her legal training was probably calculating the implications, even as her world collapsed around her. These aren't just statistics. Marcus continued, his tone remaining conversational, despite the weight of his message. They represent billions of dollars in wasted human potential. And that waste has been costing all of you money. He clicked again, revealing the complex network diagram they had shown in the lounge. Sterling and Associates at the center, with lines extending to clients' partners and affiliated firms like a financial nervous system. This is why today's acquisition wasn't just about expanding Thompson Financial Group's legal services, Marcus explained. It was about transforming an entire ecosystem of business relationships. The implications began dawning on the assembled executives. Several started calculating their own exposure, their own potential losses if their business relationships were restructured. Sarah leaned forward, speaking for the first time since they had entered the boardroom. 17 companies represented in this room use Sterling and Associates for legal services. 29 have ongoing contracts or partnerships that flow through their network. Exactly, Marcus agreed. When discrimination happens at Sterling and Associates, it creates legal liability that extends far beyond one law firm. Lost opportunities, damaged relationships, potential lawsuits that could affect every company in the network. He clicked to a financial breakdown that made several executives reach for their phones to alert their boards. The numbers were staggering. $370 million in documented losses over 5 years, with projections suggesting the trend was accelerating. That's $370 million in preventable losses. Marcus continued relentlessly. Money that could have been invested in growth, innovation, employee development, or shareholder returns. Instead, it went to lawyers and settlements and public relations cleanup. Dr. Marcus Chen, CEO of a consulting firm that had used Sterling and Associates for contract negotiations, finally found his voice. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Thompson? Marcus's smile was sharp, but not unkind. I'm proposing that we fix this systematically, permanently, and profitably. The screen filled with details of the Thompson Equity Protocol, a comprehensive program that would revolutionize how business was conducted throughout their network. Starting immediately, every company in our professional network will implement standardized anti-discrimination policies with independent oversight, Marcus announced. Not internal HR departments that might have conflicts of interest, but external auditing firms with no stake in covering up problems. The scope was breathtaking. Real-time monitoring systems that tracked hiring patterns, promotion rates, and complaint resolution. AI-powered analysis that identified potential discrimination before it became litigation. Mandatory bias training for all leadership positions with annual certification requirements and measurable outcomes. The legal framework is already in place, Sarah added. Every contract renewal, every partnership agreement, every service relationship will include compliance with these protocols. Companies that don't participate simply won't be part of the network. Dr. Sarah Walsh, who ran a successful investment firm, spoke up with the careful tone of someone trying to avoid a landmine. And if we refuse, Marcus's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. That's absolutely your choice, Sarah. But I should mention that Thompson Financial Group processes $2.3 billion in transactions quarterly. About $45 million of that involves your firm's operations. Dr. Walsh's face went pale as the implications hit her. You're threatening to cut off our transaction processing. I'm explaining market dynamics, Marcus corrected gently. Thompson Financial Group provides services to companies that share our values. If our values don't align, there are other service providers available. Though I should note that our rates are typically 15 to 20% below market, and our reliability metrics are significantly higher. Around the table, executives were frantically calculating the cost of losing access to Thompson Financial Group services. For many of them, it would mean finding new banks, new transaction processors, new legal services, all at higher costs and with less favorable terms. Victoria suddenly looked up from the envelope she had been clutching. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke. This isn't just about me, is it? You've been planning this for years. Marcus met her gaze directly. 2 years, actually. Ever since we lost Dr. Maria Santos, Angela Kim, and Dr. Keisha Williams, 3 of the most brilliant legal minds I've ever encountered, who left the profession because they couldn't deal with the discrimination they faced from firms exactly like yours. The human cost behind the systematic approach hit the room harder than any statistic could. These weren't abstract victims. They were brilliant professionals whose talents had been wasted by exactly the kind of thinking Victoria had displayed in the lounge. Each of those women represented millions in lost revenue, institutional knowledge, and future innovation. Marcus continued. We lost them not because Thompson Financial Group did anything wrong, but because we failed to create an industry environment where their brilliance could flourish. He looked directly at Victoria. So yes, Ms. Sterling, this is about more than your behavior this morning. Your actions were simply the catalyst for changes that should have happened years ago. Marcus Thompson's voice took on a different quality as he moved away from the podium. No longer the commanding CEO delivering a presentation, but a man sharing a story that had shaped every decision he had made for the past 15 years. I want to tell you about a 17-year-old kid in Detroit. Marcus began, his hands clasped behind his back, as he faced the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. His mother, Denise Thompson, worked 3 jobs to keep their family afloat. Overnight cleaning at the Ford Motor Company offices, weekend shifts at a community center, and every Tuesday and Thursday, she cleaned houses in Grosse Pointe for families who made more in a month than she made in a year. The boardroom had fallen completely silent. Even Victoria had looked up from her envelope, drawn into a narrative that seemed impossible to reconcile with the powerful man commanding their attention. That kid was brilliant. Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the marble and mahogany like a confession. Perfect SAT scores. Valedictorian of his class acceptance letters to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. But he almost didn't go to college because his mother was dying of diabetes and couldn't afford insulin. Sarah Chen's expression had softened with recognition. She had heard pieces of this story over the years, but never the complete narrative that had driven Marcus to build an empire. Denise Thompson sold everything she owned to pay for her son's first year at Harvard Business School, Marcus said, turning back to face the room. Her car, her jewelry, even her grandmother's wedding ring. She told him that education was the only inheritance she could give him, and she was willing to sacrifice everything to make it happen. Victoria's eyes were glistening with tears she was trying to suppress. The contrast between Marcus's mother's sacrifice and her own privileged path to success was stark enough to cut glass. That kid graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School, Marcus continued. He was the only black student in his class. For 2 years, he sat in lecture halls where professors used case studies about companies that wouldn't have hired him 20 years earlier. He participated in group projects where classmates assumed he was there because of affirmative action rather than merit. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was staring at her hands, probably remembering her own assumptions about Marcus's presence in the lounge. After graduation, that kid applied to 47 companies. Marcus said, his voice hardening slightly. Investment banks, consulting firms, private equity groups. Places where his Harvard MBA should have opened doors. He received 47 rejection letters. The number hung in the air like an indictment. 47 companies had looked at a Harvard MBA and seen only what they expected to see. Not potential, but problems. The 48th company was a small community development bank in Detroit. Marcus continued. They offered him a starting salary of $35,000 and a chance to help low-income families access capital for home ownership and small business development. Sarah leaned forward slightly. This was where the story became legend in financial circles, though few people knew the personal details that had driven the transformation. That kid worked 18-hour days for 3 years, Marcus said. He developed new algorithms for risk assessment that increased loan approval rates by 300% while maintaining default rates below industry standards. He created financial literacy programs that helped thousands of families build generational wealth. The achievement sounded impossibly ambitious for someone barely out of graduate school, but the evidence of Marcus's capabilities was sitting in boardrooms around the world. When he was 28, that kid started Thompson Financial Group with a $50,000 loan from the same community bank that had given him his first chance. Marcus continued. His mother had died 2 years earlier, never seeing the success she had sacrificed everything to make possible. Victoria's tears were now falling openly onto the mahogany table. The human cost of the story was hitting her harder than any corporate presentation ever could. For 15 years, that kid, who is standing in front of you today, built Thompson Financial Group into one of the most successful financial institutions in North America, Marcus said. $6.2 billion in assets, 18,000 employees, globally operations in 37 countries. He paused, letting the magnitude of the achievement settle over the room. But success didn't make the discrimination stop. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. It just became more sophisticated. Instead of rejection letters, there were assumptions about affirmative action. Instead of being excluded from opportunities, there were whispered comments about whether he really deserved his success. The boardroom was completely silent, except for the soft hum of climate control systems designed to maintain perfect comfort for the wealthy. 2 years ago, Thompson Financial Group lost 3 of our most brilliant attorneys, Marcus said, clicking his presentation to display photographs of 3 young women in graduation regalia. Dr. Maria Santos, Harvard Law Review constitutional law expert, who argued successfully before 3 appellate courts. She left the profession after being mistaken for a court stenographer 11 times in 6 months. The first photograph showed a young Latina woman whose smile radiated the confidence of someone who believed the world was full of opportunities. Angela Kim, who developed innovative approaches to corporate compliance that saved our clients millions in regulatory costs. Marcus continued advancing to the next slide. She left after a partner at another firm suggested she was hired for diversity points rather than qualifications. The second photograph showed an Asian American woman holding a law degree, her expression serious but optimistic. Dr. Keisha Williams, who specialized in securities law and helped structure some of the most complex financial instruments of the past decade, Marcus concluded, showing the final photograph. She quit after clients repeatedly asked to speak with the real lawyer during depositions. The third photograph showed a young black woman whose graduation photo captured the same determined intelligence that had driven Marcus through his own journey. Each of these women represented millions in lost revenue, institutional knowledge, and future innovation. Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of personal failure. We lost them, not because Thompson Financial Group did anything wrong, but because I failed to create an industry environment where their brilliance could flourish without constant battles against prejudice and assumption. He looked directly at Victoria, who was now openly weeping. So when I see someone like you, Ms. Sterling, making the same assumptions, perpetuating the same biases, creating the same hostile environment that cost us 3 irreplaceable talents, Marcus said quietly, I don't see it as a personal attack. I see it as a systemic problem that requires a systematic solution. The human story behind the corporate transformation had hit the room harder than any financial analysis could. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about preventing other brilliant minds from being lost to ignorance and bias. Marcus returned to the head of the boardroom table, but his demeanor had shifted from corporate authority to something more personal, more human. The photographs of the 3 lost attorneys remained on the screen, like witnesses to the conversation that would determine Victoria Sterling's future. Ms. Sterling. Marcus said, his voice carrying a gentleness that surprised everyone in the room. What do you think should happen to you? The question caught the entire boardroom off guard. Victoria looked up through her tears, confusion mixing with despair in her red-rimmed eyes. After 45 minutes of systematic demolition of her career and worldview, the concept of having agency in her own fate seemed impossible to process. I deserve to be fired, Victoria whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion and self-recrimination. I deserve everything that's happening to me. I became someone I don't even recognize, someone my daughter wouldn't be proud of. The mention of family humanized Victoria in a way that shifted the room's energy. She wasn't just a corporate villain anymore. She was a flawed human being who had lost her way in a system that rewarded competitive cruelty over collaborative excellence. Marcus walked around the table slowly, his footsteps muffled by carpet that cost more per square yard than most people's monthly rent. He stopped beside Victoria's chair, not looming over her, but positioning himself as an equal participant in a difficult conversation. 6 months ago, Marcus said Thompson Financial Group hired Dr. Rebecca Martinez, an organizational psychologist who specializes in understanding why talented people leave our industry. Her research revealed something fascinating. He pulled out his tablet and opened a research document, reading directly from the screen. People who discriminate aren't born that way. They're shaped by environments that reward zero-sum thinking while providing no framework for inclusive success. Dr. Martinez called it scarcity discrimination, hurting others because you believe opportunities are limited. Victoria looked up, confusion mixing with fragile hope in her expression. This wasn't the conversation she had expected to have after destroying her career so spectacularly. Sterling and Associates culture rewarded you for being territorial, exclusive, and competitive at any cost. Marcus continued. For 12 years, you succeeded by keeping other people down. The firm didn't just tolerate this behavior. It promoted you because of it. Around the table, other executives began shifting uncomfortably. Several recognized their own organizational cultures in Marcus's description, their own complicity in systems that incentivized exclusion. But Dr. Martinez also discovered that people can change when incentive structures change. Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of optimism that surprised everyone listening. When collaboration becomes more profitable than competition. When inclusion drives innovation instead of hindering it. Sarah Chen leaned forward, clearly familiar with this initiative. Her expression suggested that what Marcus was about to propose had been carefully planned and thoroughly researched. So, here's what's going to happen. Marcus continued, sitting down in the chair next to Victoria, a gesture that sent ripples of surprise through the boardroom. You'll resign from your current position today with a severance package that includes 6 months of salary and full benefits. Victoria's head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since the credentials had been revealed. But Marcus continued. You'll also become the first participant in Thompson Financial Group's Executive Transformation Program. He tapped his tablet, projecting a detailed curriculum onto the room's display system. The scope was comprehensive and intensive. 12 weeks of one-on-one coaching with bias experts, 8 weeks of group sessions with other executives who had made similar mistakes, 4 weeks of supervised mentoring with employees from underrepresented backgrounds. The program isn't punishment, Victoria Sarah added, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had helped design the initiative. It's education. Intensive training with Dr. Martinez and her team to understand unconscious bias, develop inclusive leadership skills, and learn to recognize discriminatory behavior before it happens. Victoria's hands trembled as she processed the offer. After expecting complete professional destruction, the possibility of redemption seemed almost too good to believe. This is a second chance, Victoria asked, her voice barely audible above the room's ambient noise. This is an opportunity to earn a second chance, Marcus corrected gently. The program requires genuine self-reflection, uncomfortable realizations about your past behavior, and fundamental changes in how you think about success and leadership. The curriculum on the screen was daunting in its thoroughness. Modules on unconscious bias, inclusive communication, systemic thinking, and restorative justice. Weekly assessments, peer feedback sessions, and public accountability measures that would track Victoria's progress in real time. And when you complete the program, Victoria asked, not daring to hope for what might come next. Marcus's smile was genuine for the first time all morning. When you complete the program, you'll have a choice. You can take your new skills to another firm armed with certification that proves your commitment to inclusive leadership. He paused, building anticipation around the table. Or Marcus continued, you can return to work for Thompson Financial Group as our Director of Inclusive Culture, helping other companies implement similar transformation programs. Victoria's mouth fell open. Around the table, executives exchanged glances of amazement. The woman who had been destroying her career 90 minutes earlier was now being offered a path to redemption and possibly a more meaningful career than she had ever imagined. Why, Victoria whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. After everything I said, everything I did to you, why would you give me this chance? Marcus's expression was serious, but kind. Because changing you changes everything. Every executive you influence, every policy you help create, every company culture you help transform. The impact multiplies exponentially. He stood and addressed the entire room. This is what systemic change looks like. Not destroying people who make mistakes, but giving them tools to become part of the solution. Victoria's transformation story will be more powerful than any corporate diversity presentation could ever be. The offer hung in the air like a bridge between destruction and redemption, between the old way of handling discrimination and a revolutionary new approach that promised to transform not just individuals, but entire industries. Within 6 hours of Sarah Kim's TikTok live stream ending, the phones at Thompson Financial Group's headquarters began ringing with an intensity that overwhelmed their corporate communications department. The first call came from Robert Henderson, CEO of Meridian Capital Management, one of Wall Street's most conservative firms. Marcus Henderson's voice carried the carefully controlled tone of someone trying to manage a crisis. I've been watching the coverage of this morning's incident. My board is asking questions about our relationship with Sterling and Associates. Marcus sat in his corner office looking out at a Manhattan skyline that seemed different now that the story had broken. The city's financial district was buzzing with conversations about transformation, accountability, and the cost of discrimination in ways that would have been impossible just hours earlier. What kind of questions Robert Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer? The kind that involve liability assessments and risk management protocols. Henderson replied, "My legal team is reviewing every contract we have that flows through Sterling & Associates. The exposure calculations are significant." Before Marcus could respond, his assistant Sarah was at his door with a list of callback requests that had grown to over 200 names. CNN, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and every major business publication in North America wanted statements about the incident and the transformation program. But the media attention was only the beginning. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, dean of Harvard Business School, called to request an emergency meeting about incorporating the Thompson Equity Protocol into their required curriculum. The University of Chicago's Booth School of Business wanted to create a case study. Wharton was developing a new course around systemic bias in financial services. "The academic interest is unprecedented," Dr. Rodriguez explained during their video call that afternoon. "We're seeing MBA programs across the country requesting information about your transformation methodology. This isn't just a business story anymore. It's becoming a foundational case study in organizational change management." The international response was equally dramatic. Thompson Financial Group's London office reported calls from the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and finance ministers from 12 different countries. The European Union's Directorate General for Financial Stability was requesting briefings on the monitoring systems that could detect discrimination before it became litigation. The EU is considering legislation that would require real-time bias monitoring for all financial institutions, explained Dr. James Whitfield Thompson, Financial Group's Director of International Operations. "They want to use our protocols as the foundation for continent-wide standards." But perhaps the most significant calls came from unexpected sources. Dr. Aisha Patel, Chief Diversity Officer at Google, wanted to adapt the transformation program for the technology sector. The National Basketball Association was interested in applying similar principles to front office operations. Even the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights was exploring how the protocols might address discrimination in international business relationships. The economic impact was immediate and measurable. Thompson Financial Group's stock price had surged 23% since the morning announcement, adding $1.4 billion to their market capitalization. But more importantly, companies throughout their network were proactively implementing changes to avoid being excluded from future business relationships. "We're seeing voluntary compliance at a rate we never anticipated," Sarah Chen reported during their emergency strategy meeting. 47 companies have contacted us about implementing the full protocol before their contract renewals. They're not waiting for requirements. They're getting ahead of them. The transformation of Sterling & Associates was proceeding with surgical precision. Dr. Rebecca Martinez had assembled a team of organizational psychologists, bias experts, and change management specialists who were conducting a complete cultural audit of the firm. Every policy, every procedure, every unwritten rule was being examined through the lens of inclusive excellence. "What we're finding is exactly what we expected," Dr. Martinez explained during her first progress report. "A culture that has systematically rewarded exclusionary behavior while penalizing inclusive leadership. The transformation won't just change individual behavior. It will require rebuilding the fundamental incentive structures that shape daily decisions." Victoria Sterling had thrown herself into the transformation program with the intensity of someone whose life depended on the outcome. Her first week included individual sessions with Dr. Martinez, group discussions with other executives undergoing similar transformations, and supervised interactions with Thompson Financial Group employees from underrepresented backgrounds. The hardest part: Victoria admitted during her first public interview since the incident, is recognizing how my assumptions shaped every interaction I had. I thought I was protecting corporate standards, but I was actually protecting a system that excluded brilliant people for reasons that had nothing to do with competence. The media coverage had evolved from sensational headlines about corporate confrontation to serious analysis of systemic discrimination in American business. The Harvard Business Review published a special issue examining the economic costs of bias. Forbes ran a cover story about transformation-based approaches to corporate accountability. But the most powerful coverage came from unexpected sources. The three attorneys whose departures had motivated Marcus's systematic approach, Dr. Maria Santos, Angela Kim, and Dr. Keisha Williams, agreed to be interviewed about their experiences and the broader implications of the Thompson Equity Protocol. What Marcus has created isn't just about individual accountability, Dr. Santos explained during her interview with 60 Minutes. It's about building systems that make it economically impossible to maintain discriminatory practices. When inclusion becomes profitable and exclusion becomes expensive, change happens naturally. The ripple effects were spreading far beyond Manhattan's financial district, creating waves of transformation that would reshape how American business thought about talent opportunity and the true cost of prejudice. The early autumn sun streamed through the windows of Thompson Financial Group's newly expanded training facility, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine just 12 weeks earlier. Victoria Sterling stood before a group of 15 senior executives from various companies, her voice steady and clear as she described her journey from discrimination to transformation. 3 months ago, I was the person you saw in that viral video, Victoria said, clicking to advance her presentation. I was someone who had spent 12 years climbing a ladder that I thought was built on merit, but was actually constructed from privilege and exclusion. The audience. CFOs, managing directors, and senior partners from across the financial industry listened with the intensity of people examining their own potential futures. Some were there voluntarily eager to learn from Victoria's experience. Others had been mandated by their boards to attend after Thompson Financial Group's protocols had revealed problematic patterns in their own organizations. Dr. Rebecca Martinez sat in the back of the room, taking notes on Victoria's presentation style and the audience's reactions. After 3 months of intensive work, Victoria had become the transformation program's most powerful case study, living proof that systemic change was possible even for people who had seemed irredeemably committed to discriminatory practices. The transformation process isn't comfortable. Victoria continued her honesty, cutting through any pretense of easy solutions. It requires acknowledging that success you thought you earned might have been handed to you by systems designed to exclude others. It means recognizing that competence you dismissed in others might have been more valuable than anything you brought to the table. In the audience, James Morrison, a senior partner at a prestigious consulting firm, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His company had implemented Thompson Financial Group's monitoring systems 6 weeks earlier, and the results had revealed patterns of bias in promotion decisions that his leadership team was still struggling to address. Victoria clicked to a slide showing measurable results from her own transformation. Before entering the program, my team at Sterling & Associates had a 23% annual turnover rate among attorneys from underrepresented backgrounds. The average tenure for women of color was 18 months. We told ourselves it was about fit, about standards, about maintaining excellence. She paused, letting the implications settle over the room. After implementing the changes, Dr. Martinez recommended, our retention rates have improved by 67%. More importantly, our client satisfaction scores have increased by 34%, and our revenue per attorney has grown by 28%. Inclusion isn't just morally right, it's profitable. The financial metrics commanded attention in ways that moral arguments never could. These were business leaders who understood revenue growth and efficiency improvements. Victoria was speaking their language while challenging their assumptions. Dr. Martinez stood to address the group during the break period. What Victoria represents isn't unique, she explained to the assembled executives. Our research has tracked 43 individuals who have completed similar transformation programs across various industries. The pattern is consistent. People who undergo systematic bias training become more effective leaders, not just more inclusive ones. The data was compelling. Teams led by program graduates showed 31% higher employee engagement scores, 29% better innovation metrics, and 42% improved client retention rates. The transformation wasn't just changing attitudes, it was driving business results that made the programs impossible for profit-focused organizations to ignore. But the real test of Victoria's transformation came during the question and answer session. A managing director from a major investment bank raised his hand with obvious skepticism. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his tone carrying the challenge of someone testing for authenticity. "How do we know this isn't just performance? How do we know you've actually changed rather than simply learned to say the right things?" Victoria's response was immediate and unflinching. "You don't know," she said simply. "And neither do I completely. Change is an ongoing process, not a destination. Every day I have to choose between old patterns of thinking and new ways of seeing the world." She clicked to a final slide, showing her daily accountability measures, regular check-ins with Dr. Martinez, feedback sessions with diverse colleagues, and monthly assessments of her team's demographic composition and satisfaction scores. "But here's what I can tell you," Victoria continued. 3 months ago, I saw Marcus Thompson as a threat to be eliminated. Today, I see him as a colleague who gave me the opportunity to become someone my daughter can be proud of. That transformation is measured not just in training completion certificates, but in the careers I'm now helping to build instead of destroy. The room fell silent as the implications of Victoria's journey became clear. This wasn't just about individual redemption. It was about proof that systemic change was possible, that people could evolve, and that business success could be compatible with social justice. The transformation program had taken its first success story and turned her into a beacon for industry-wide change. The Hart Senate Office Building's Committee Room 216 had hosted countless hearings on financial regulation, corporate accountability, and economic policy. But the packed gallery and overflow crowd, watching via live stream, suggested that this morning's session on workplace discrimination in financial services would be different from typical congressional proceedings. Senator Patricia Williams, chair of the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, called the hearing to order with a gravity that acknowledged the national attention focused on the proceedings. The viral video of Victoria Sterling's confrontation with Marcus Thompson had sparked a congressional investigation into discriminatory practices throughout the financial industry. Today's hearing, Senator Williams announced, will examine both the costs of workplace discrimination and innovative approaches to addressing systemic bias in American business. Our witnesses represent different perspectives on these critical issues. Victoria Sterling sat at the witness table in a navy blue suit that projected competence without ostentation. She had prepared for this moment through weeks of coaching with Dr. Rebecca Martinez and the Thompson Financial Group legal team. Her testimony would mark the first time she had spoken publicly about her transformation since entering the program 4 months earlier. Senator Richard Hayes, the ranking Republican member, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. "Ms. Sterling, you're here today because a video of your confrontation with Marcus Thompson went viral and created what some have called a national conversation about bias in the workplace. But you're also here as someone who participated in what amounts to corporate-sponsored rehabilitation. How do we know your testimony reflects genuine change rather than public relations strategy?" Victoria's answer was direct and unflinching. "Senator Hayes, you don't know. and I understand why you would question my motives. She looked directly at him, then swept her gaze across the committee panel. 4 months ago, I was someone who had built a successful career on exclusionary practices. I thought I was maintaining standards when I was actually maintaining barriers. She opened her prepared statement, but then set it aside and spoke directly from experience. I want to tell you about the economic cost of my behavior, Victoria continued. During my 12 years at Sterling & Associates, my attitudes and actions contributed to the departure of 17 attorneys from underrepresented backgrounds. Conservative estimates suggest that each departure cost the firm between $150,000 and $300,000 in recruitment training and lost productivity. The mathematics of discrimination resonated in a room filled with legislators accustomed to thinking in terms of economic impact and fiscal responsibility. But the human cost was higher, Victoria said, her voice carrying increasing strength. Those 17 attorneys represented brilliant legal minds who left the profession entirely. Dr. Angela Kim, who developed compliance strategies that saved clients millions, now teaches high school. Maria Santos, who had argued successfully before 3 appellate courts, works for a nonprofit legal aid society. Keisha Williams, who specialized in securities law, left legal practice to become a community organizer. Senator Williams nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of testimony that could drive legislative action. The traditional approach to addressing my behavior would have been termination lawsuit and public condemnation. Victoria continued. That approach might have satisfied demands for justice, but it wouldn't have addressed the systemic issues that created my attitudes in the first place. She clicked a remote to advance her presentation on the committee room's display screens. Charts and graphs filled the monitors, showing data from Thompson Financial Group's transformation program. Instead, Marcus Thompson offered something unprecedented: systematic rehabilitation based on evidence-based bias training and ongoing accountability measures, Victoria explained. The program required me to confront not just my actions, but the assumptions that drove those actions. Senator David Chen, representing California, interrupted with a pointed question. Ms. Sterling, you've described the program's impact on you personally. But what evidence do we have that this approach works at scale? Victoria's response was backed by comprehensive data. Senator Chen Thompson Financial Group has now implemented their equity protocols across 47 companies, representing $180 billion in combined assets. The measurable results include a 64% reduction in discrimination complaints, a 45% improvement in retention rates for employees from underrepresented backgrounds, and a 38% increase in overall profitability among participating firms. She advanced to the next slide, showing comparative data from companies that had implemented the Thompson protocols versus industry averages. More importantly, Victoria continued, we're seeing what economists call a network effect. Companies that adopt these standards are preferentially working with other companies that meet the same criteria. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's becoming economically unsustainable. Senator Hayes pressed further. But Ms. Sterling, doesn't this approach essentially allow people to buy their way out of accountability? You engaged in discriminatory behavior and were rewarded with an executive position at one of the most powerful financial institutions in the country. The question struck at the heart of public skepticism about corporate accountability programs. Victoria had anticipated this challenge and prepared her most carefully considered response. Senator, I understand that concern, Victoria replied. But accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about preventing future harm. My termination would have sent a message, but it wouldn't have changed the systems that created my behavior. My transformation, however, has influenced 43 other executives who have completed similar programs. She gestured toward the gallery, where several program graduates sat alongside civil rights advocates and business leaders. Each person who completes this transformation becomes an advocate for inclusive practices in their own organization. Victoria explained. The multiplier effect means that one person's change can influence hundreds or thousands of others. That's systemic impact that goes far beyond individual punishment. Senator Williams looked directly at Victoria with the expression of someone trying to assess sincerity through congressional theater. Ms. Sterling, if you could speak directly to other executives who might be watching this hearing, what would you tell them? Victoria paused, considering not just her words, but their potential impact on careers and corporate cultures across the country. I would tell them that the choice isn't between maintaining standards and lowering them, Victoria said. The choice is between exclusive standards that waste talent and inclusive standards that optimize it. Every assumption you make about who belongs and who doesn't is costing your company money and costing our economy innovation. She looked directly into the C-SPAN camera that was broadcasting the hearing live. I would also tell them that transformation is possible, but only if you're willing to acknowledge that success built on exclusion isn't really success at all. It's just advantage maintained through artificial scarcity. The hearing room fell silent as Victoria's testimony concluded. Senator Williams announced a brief recess, but the real impact was already spreading through social media news coverage and corporate boardrooms where executives were watching and calculating their own exposure to the changes Victoria represented. Marcus Thompson would testify next, but Victoria Sterling had already accomplished something unprecedented. She had turned public accountability into a catalyst for industry-wide transformation, proving that redemption could become a tool for systematic change. The grand ballroom of the Manhattan Marriott Marquis buzzed with an energy unlike any corporate event in recent memory. The first annual Inclusive Excellence Summit had drawn over 800 executives representing companies with combined assets exceeding $500 billion. What had started as Thompson Financial Group's response to one incident of discrimination had evolved into a movement reshaping American business culture. Marcus Thompson stood at the podium where he had once announced quarterly earnings and acquisition strategies. But this morning's keynote would address something more significant than profit margins: the transformation of an entire industry's approach to talent opportunity and human potential. 6 months ago, Marcus began his voice carrying easily across the packed ballroom. Victoria Sterling and I had a confrontation that changed both our lives. That moment went viral, not because it was unique, but because it represented experiences that millions of people have faced in workplaces across America. The audience included many faces that had become familiar through the months of implementing the Thompson Equity Protocol. CEOs who had initially resisted the changes now sat in the front rows, their company's success stories serving as evidence of the program's effectiveness. Today, I want to introduce someone who embodies the possibility of transformation. Marcus continued, stepping aside from the podium. Please welcome Thompson Financial Group's Director of Inclusive Culture, Victoria Sterling. The applause was sustained and genuine as Victoria approached the microphone. She wore a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without ostentation, her bearing confident but humble. The woman who had once wielded exclusion as a weapon had become one of the most effective advocates for inclusion in corporate America. 6 months ago, I was the worst version of myself. Victoria began, her voice steady and clear. I had spent 12 years building a successful career on the premise that excellence required exclusion, that maintaining standards meant keeping certain people out. The audience listened with the intensity of people examining their own potential for change. Victoria's transformation story had become legendary in business circles, but hearing it directly from her carried an impact that no case study could match. I discriminated against Marcus Thompson because I had been taught that success was a zero-sum game, Victoria continued. I believed that opportunities were scarce, that allowing different people into our professional spaces would somehow diminish my own achievements. She clicked her presentation remote, and the screen behind her filled with data that told the story of systemic change at unprecedented scale. The transformation program didn't just change my attitudes, it rebuilt my understanding of what excellence actually means, Victoria explained. Real excellence isn't about excluding talented people. It's about creating environments where talent can flourish, regardless of the demographics of the person possessing it. The slides showed measurable results that commanded attention in any boardroom. Companies implementing the Thompson protocols had seen average revenue increases of 34%, employee satisfaction scores up by 47%, and client retention rates improved by 39%. But the most important metric isn't financial, Victoria said, advancing to photographs of young professionals who had joined participating companies over the past 6 months. It's the careers we're building instead of destroying, the innovations we're fostering instead of suppressing, the human potential we're developing instead of wasting. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, now serving as Thompson Financial Group's Chief Innovation Officer, stepped forward to present the program's expansion plans. The scope was breathtaking: partnerships with universities to integrate bias training into business curricula, collaboration with government agencies to develop new anti-discrimination enforcement mechanisms, and international agreements to implement similar protocols globally. We're announcing today that 23 countries have committed to implementing versions of the Thompson Equity Protocol, Dr. Walsh explained. The European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, and 20 other nations are developing legislation that will require real-time bias monitoring for financial institutions. The international expansion represented validation of principles that had started with one confrontation in one corporate lounge. Marcus had transformed a moment of personal discrimination into a global movement that was reshaping how business operated across cultures and continents. But the most powerful moment of the summit came when Marcus invited 3 special guests to join him on stage: Dr. Maria Santos, Angela Kim, and Dr. Keisha Williams, the 3 attorneys whose departures had originally motivated his systematic approach to change. 2 years ago, we lost these 3 brilliant women to discrimination and bias, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of personal failure transformed into systematic success. Today, they're returning to Thompson Financial Group as senior partners in our newly formed Civil Rights and Corporate Accountability Division. The announcement brought the audience to their feet in sustained applause. These weren't just job appointments. They were symbols of redemption, proof that talent could be recovered and excellence could be restored when systems changed to support it. Dr. Santos approached the microphone with the confident bearing of someone whose brilliance had finally found an environment where it could flourish without constant battle. When I left the legal profession 18 months ago, Dr. Santos said, I believed that corporate America was fundamentally incompatible with my values and my identity. I thought the choice was between my integrity and my career. She gestured toward the packed ballroom filled with executives who had committed their companies to transformation. What Marcus and Victoria have proven is that the choice was actually between old systems and new possibilities. Dr. Santos continued, they've shown that businesses can be both profitable and just, both competitive and inclusive, both excellent and equitable. Angela Kim stepped forward to address the international audience. The changes we're implementing here in the United States are spreading globally because discrimination is expensive everywhere. When companies realize that bias costs money and inclusion generates profit, market forces become allies of social justice. Dr. Keisha Williams concluded their presentation with a challenge that resonated throughout the ballroom. The question isn't whether your company can afford to implement these changes. The question is whether you can afford not to. In an increasingly competitive global economy, wasting talent through discrimination isn't just morally wrong. It's strategically stupid. As the formal presentations concluded, Marcus returned to the podium for his closing remarks. The man who had once faced assumptions about his worthiness to occupy an executive lounge now commanded attention from hundreds of leaders who had committed billions of dollars to transformation based on his vision. 6 months ago, Victoria Sterling saw me as a threat to be eliminated, Marcus said, looking directly at Victoria with genuine warmth. Today, she's one of my most trusted colleagues and most effective advocates for change. That transformation didn't happen because we destroyed the old Victoria. It happened because we gave her tools to become the leader she always had the potential to be. The summit concluded with commitments that would reshape corporate America for generations to come. But perhaps the most significant moment was the simplest: Victoria Sterling and Marcus Thompson shaking hands, not as former adversaries, but as partners in building a more inclusive and successful future for American business. The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. 1 year after the confrontation that changed everything, Dr. Rebecca Martinez stood before the United Nations Commission on Human Rights in Geneva, presenting data that would influence international policy for decades to come. The Thompson Equity Protocol had evolved from a corporate transformation program into a global standard for addressing systemic discrimination in business environments. The economic impact of bias reduction programs has exceeded all projections, Dr. Martinez reported to the Assembly of International Representatives. Companies implementing comprehensive bias monitoring and transformation protocols have seen average productivity increases of 42%, innovation metrics improved by 67%, and employee satisfaction scores up by 58%. The UN hall buzzed with translation services conveying her words into dozens of languages, but the mathematical language of success was universal. The Thompson approach had proven that social justice and economic prosperity weren't competing values. They were complementary forces that strengthened when properly aligned. In boardrooms across 6 continents, executives were calculating the costs of maintaining discriminatory practices versus the benefits of transformation. The business case for inclusion had become so compelling that resistance was increasingly seen as strategic incompetence rather than cultural preference. Harvard Business School had redesigned its entire MBA curriculum around principles derived from the Thompson protocols. Professor David Kim, who had studied the program's implementation across 127 companies, was documenting results that challenged fundamental assumptions about organizational behavior. What we're seeing isn't just individual change, Professor Kim explained during his landmark lecture on systematic bias reduction and corporate performance. We're witnessing the emergence of new organizational DNA that makes discrimination literally impossible to sustain. The transformation had spread far beyond financial services. Google had implemented Thompson-inspired protocols that reduced gender bias in performance evaluations by 73%. The National Football League was using similar systems to address diversity issues in coaching and front office positions. Even the U.S. military was exploring applications for recruitment and promotion processes. But perhaps the most significant impact was generational. Young professionals entering the workforce now expected bias monitoring transformation programs and inclusive excellence as standard corporate features. Companies that couldn't demonstrate commitment to these principles found themselves unable to attract top talent. Sarah Chen, now CEO of Thompson Financial Group, following Marcus's appointment as chairman, regularly spoke to business schools about the competitive advantages of inclusive leadership. Her presentations always included a slide showing demographic data from their recent MBA recruitment: 47%, women 38%, people of color 23%, first-generation college graduates. We're not hiring for diversity, Sarah would explain to skeptical audiences. We're hiring the best talent available, and it turns out that the best talent is demographically diverse. When you remove barriers that have nothing to do with competence, the ripple effects extended into communities that had been systematically excluded from economic opportunity. Thompson Financial Group's Community Investment Division led by Dr. Keisha Williams, had provided $2.3 billion in capital to minority-owned businesses over the past year. The return on investment exceeded industry averages by 23%, proving that excluded entrepreneurs hadn't lacked competence. They had lacked access. Victoria Sterling's transformation had become a case study taught in psychology, programs, business schools, and public policy courses worldwide. Her willingness to undergo public transformation had inspired similar programs in industries from technology to healthcare to entertainment. The most powerful tool for changing systemic bias isn't punishment. Victoria explained during her TED Talk, which had been viewed over 15 million times. It's proof that people can change when systems change to support that transformation. The legislative impact was equally profound. The U.S. Congress had passed the Workplace Equity Accountability Act, requiring companies with federal contracts to implement bias monitoring systems. Similar legislation was pending in the European Parliament, and corporate accountability standards were being raised globally. But Marcus Thompson remained focused on the human stories behind the statistics. His office walls were covered with photographs of young professionals whose careers had been shaped by the changes he had initiated. Letters from parents whose children had found opportunities that hadn't existed just years earlier. Thank you notes from executives who had discovered that inclusive leadership made them more effective, not less demanding. The measure of this program's success isn't in the profits it's generated or the policies it's influenced. Marcus reflected during his final interview as CEO. It's in the young woman who doesn't have to choose between her identity and her ambitions. It's in the brilliant mind that doesn't get wasted because of someone else's assumptions. It's in the next generation of leaders who will never know a business world where discrimination was considered normal. The transformation that had started with one moment of bias had become a permanent shift in how American business understood talent opportunity and human potential. The bigger picture wasn't just about corporate success. It was about creating a society where excellence could emerge from any background and flourish in environments designed to support it rather than suppress it. The legacy was written not in profit reports, but in lives changed and possibilities created. The community center in East New York was a far cry from the marble-clad boardrooms where Marcus Thompson now spent most of his time. But every third Tuesday evening, he returned to the neighborhood where his journey began, speaking to teenagers who reminded him of his 17-year-old self, brilliant, ambitious, and uncertain, whether success was something that happened to people like them. Tonight was different. Victoria Sterling sat beside him at the folding table in the center's main room, facing 43 high school students, whose questions had evolved from skeptical to genuinely curious over the months since she had started joining these sessions. Mr. Thompson said, "Aaliyah Jackson, a senior with dreams of studying finance at Howard University. How did you know that Ms. Sterling could really change? How did you know she wasn't just pretending?" Marcus looked at Victoria, who had insisted on fielding the difficult questions herself. Her transformation from antagonist to ally had been thorough, but these students demanded authenticity in ways that corporate audiences never could. "I didn't know," Victoria answered honestly, and neither did he. Change is a choice you make every day, not a destination you reach once and stay at forever. She gestured around the room, taking in faces that represented every demographic her old assumptions would have dismissed. "What I learned is that the person I was 6 months ago wasn't the person I had to remain." The students appreciated directness. Many had faced their own assumptions about who they could become, what careers were available to them, what doors might open if they knocked hard enough and long enough. Marcus had shared his mother's story with this group many times, but tonight he added details he had never spoken publicly. "My mother, Denise Thompson, died believing that her sacrifice had given me access to a world that would judge me fairly. She never knew that I would spend years fighting the same battles she thought education would eliminate. The room was completely quiet. These students understood the weight of parental sacrifice, the pressure of carrying family dreams, along with personal ambitions. But here's what she also gave me. Marcus continued, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who had made peace with painful truths. She taught me that excellence isn't about proving you deserve to be somewhere. It's about changing the places you go, so that everyone who comes after you has an easier path. Victoria nodded, understanding the lesson in ways she couldn't have comprehended a year earlier. I spent 12 years trying to prove I belonged in spaces that were designed to exclude people. I thought maintaining those barriers protected my position. What I learned is that breaking down barriers actually made me more successful, not less. After the session ended and the students had left to catch buses and subway trains home, Marcus and Victoria sat in the empty community center, sharing the kind of comfortable silence that had developed between two people who had been through transformation together. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked. "Not firing me, I mean. Not handling it the traditional way." Marcus considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I think about Dr. Santos, Angela, and Keisha. How different their careers might have been if we had addressed these issues 5 years earlier. But regret is about the past, and this work is about the future." Victoria understood. Her own regrets were substantial careers she had damaged, opportunities she had blocked, young attorneys whose potential she had dismissed or diminished. But the transformation program had taught her to channel regret into action rather than self-recrimination. "My daughter asked me something last week," Victoria said. "She wanted to know if I was a bad person before I changed. I told her that I was a person who did bad things because I had learned to see the world in bad ways." Marcus smiled. "That's a good answer." "What did she say?" "She said she was proud that I learned to see better." Victoria's voice carried the emotion of someone who had discovered that redemption was possible, even when it seemed impossible. She said that meant other people could learn too. They sat quietly for a moment. Two people who had found peace, not through avoiding conflict, but by transforming it into something constructive. Outside, East New York continued its daily struggle with poverty, inequality, and limited opportunity. But inside the community center, two adults who had learned to see each other clearly were planning programs that would create pathways for others to follow. The personal resolution wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting. It was about building something better from the wreckage of what had been broken. 3 years after the confrontation heard around the world, the morning news from London carried a familiar story with an international twist. Margaret Pemberton, a senior partner at Chatham & Associates, one of the UK's most prestigious law firms, had been recorded making dismissive comments about a Bangladeshi British solicitor during a client meeting. But instead of the traditional damage control and legal settlements, the firm announced immediate enrollment in the Thompson Transformation Protocol, now licensed in 47 countries. The global standardization of bias reduction programs has fundamentally altered how multinational corporations approach human resources, explained Dr. James Whitfield during his presentation to the World Economic Forum in Davos. Companies can no longer afford to maintain different standards in different countries. Excellence and inclusion have become universal business requirements. In Singapore, Malaysia's largest investment bank had implemented real-time bias monitoring systems that detected discriminatory language in emails, performance reviews, and client communications. The technology developed by Thompson Financial Group's innovation division had prevented an estimated $47 million in potential discrimination settlements across Asian markets. The University of Cape Town Business School had established the Victoria Sterling Chair in Organizational Transformation, an endowed professorship funded by companies whose corporate cultures had been revolutionized by transformation programs. Professor Elena Mokoena used the position to study how bias reduction protocols adapted to different cultural contexts, while maintaining universal effectiveness. What we've learned is that discrimination costs money in every economy, Professor Mokoena explained during her interview with the BBC. Whether we're talking about gender bias in Tokyo, racial prejudice in Sao Paulo, or caste discrimination in Mumbai, the mathematical impact is consistent. Excluding talent reduces profitability. The European Union had passed comprehensive legislation requiring bias monitoring for all financial institutions with assets exceeding €1 billion. The regulations known as the Brussels Protocols were directly based on Thompson Financial Group's pioneering systems and had created a new industry of bias detection technology companies. In Australia, the government's Treasury Department was collaborating with Aboriginal business leaders to implement transformation programs specifically designed to address historical inequities in financial services. The initiative, led by Dr. Sarah Kim, had resulted in a 340% increase in Indigenous-owned businesses receiving commercial loans. The documentary, The Transformation, which followed Victoria Sterling's journey from discrimination to advocacy, had been nominated for an Academy Award and translated into 37 languages. Its impact on corporate culture was measurable. Companies featured in the film reported recruitment inquiries increasing by an average of 67% among applicants from underrepresented backgrounds. Perhaps most significantly, the next generation of business leaders was growing up with transformation principles as foundational assumptions rather than revolutionary innovations. MBA programs worldwide now required courses in bias recognition and inclusive leadership. Young professionals expected these standards in their employers and were willing to sacrifice salary for companies that demonstrated genuine commitment to equitable practices. The Global Business Ethics Council, established by the United Nations in partnership with major corporations, had designated Thompson Financial Group's protocols as the international standard for bias reduction. Marcus Thompson, now serving as the council's chairman, regularly addressed gatherings of world leaders about the economic benefits of inclusive business practices. The transformation that began with one confrontation has become a global movement because the underlying mathematics are universal, Marcus explained during his address to the G20 summit. Discrimination wastes human potential, and wasted potential costs money in every economy, every culture, every society. The ripple effects continued spreading, creating waves of change that reached corporate boardrooms in Mumbai, startup offices in Tel Aviv, government agencies in Ottawa, and community centers in Detroit, where young people continued to learn that their potential was limited only by their imagination, not by other people's assumptions. The story you've just heard isn't fiction. It's a blueprint for the kind of transformation happening in boardrooms, courtrooms, and communities across America right now. But here's the most important question. What are you going to do with this knowledge? If you've ever been in Marcus Thompson's position, underestimated, dismissed, or excluded because of who you are, rather than what you can contribute, you know the cost of bias isn't just personal. It's economic. It's innovative. It's the difference between societies that thrive and societies that waste their most valuable resource, human potential. If you've ever been in Victoria Sterling's position, maybe not as dramatically, but in moments when assumptions shaped your actions, when comfort with sameness overrode curiosity about difference, you know that transformation is possible. The question isn't whether you've made mistakes. The question is whether you're willing to learn from them. Look around your workplace tomorrow. Notice who speaks in meetings and who stays silent. Pay attention to whose ideas get credit and whose contributions go unacknowledged. Ask yourself, are we making decisions based on evidence or assumptions? Are we building excellence or just maintaining exclusion? If you're in a position of leadership, you have the power to implement change. Start with data, measure your hiring patterns, promotion rates, and retention statistics by demographic. The numbers will tell you stories you might not want to hear. but they'll also show you opportunities you can't afford to ignore. If you're not in a position of formal authority, you still have influence. You can speak up when you witness bias. You can amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. You can ask the questions that make people think differently about who belongs and who contributes. The transformation that started with one confrontation in one corporate lounge has become a global movement because individual actions create collective change. Every assumption you challenge, every barrier you remove, every person you see clearly, instead of stereotypically, creates ripple effects that spread far beyond what you can measure. Marcus Thompson turned a moment of discrimination into a catalyst for industry transformation. Victoria Sterling turned personal failure into professional purpose. Dr. Santos Angela Kim and Dr. Keisha Williams turned exclusion into excellence. What will you turn your next opportunity into? The choice is yours. The time is now. The future of business, the economy and society depends on leaders who understand that excellence isn't about excluding people. It's about including everyone who has something valuable to contribute. That means everyone. Your transformation starts with your next decision. Make it count.